It's winter 2011. A good friend, there, just gave me some much-needed tough love and shouldered me into applying for Medicaid food stamps. I am so embarrassed to be doing this, but I pulled the blinds to fill out the application. And that turns out to be useful when I click send and then collapse on the floor in the middle of a screaming panic attack. Anyway, the whole thing is ridiculous. This is a phase. I'll be over by summer. I like to tell stories. Without the continuity of family or geographic stability, stories are what roots I'm able to work into the soil. Stories are the way I learn to communicate. Stories are the only way I know how to live in the world. For instance, let me tell you about my schizophrenic grandmother and the time that she fired a rifle at my mother on prom night. Or about the people I grew up with who spent their lives waiting for a job in a factory that burned down in the 90s. Or there's stories about me. Like the first time I stepped into a city after the town I had spent my entire life in and was so overloaded by all the lights and sounds and tall buildings that when I tried to catch a bus home, I was openly glossolating to myself, and everyone pitched at me a crazy person. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been to Portland, Maine, but they have buildings there that are like 6, 7 stories tall. Or there's the time I went catatonic on the 6 train in New York, and my poor dear love had to try to figure out how to deal with something I'd never talked about, something I'd tried to be stubborn enough to keep from ever coming up. Or there's the time my obsession with train stations kept me from being murdered in Boston. Stories are how I build my world. Sometimes making my life what I want it to be feels like it should just be as simple as telling another story. It's autumn 2012. After a long struggle, the state gave in to my lawyer and let me have Medicaid for food stamps. My first denial for SSDI comes in, and I never file an appeal. I mean, that process takes years, and I know I'll muscle my way through this week by spring. Sanity is just fear, right? Sometimes I tell stories about my parents. I tell stories about my father, who rarely worked and instead sat on the couch in his tidy whities, eating cereal out of the box and watching cartoons. Telling my mother that he wasn't going to have any wife of his working. I mean, who would take care of the kids? And promising her that he was looking for work, just, you know, not in any way that was visible to her. It wasn't his fault they weren't doing jobs where we lived. My father, sexist, inept, violent, childish, and selfish, makes an easy villain in the logic of a story. Try as I might to find some nuance to him, the best I can do is to take the stories I gathered to defend myself when I was young, and use them to pull back the snidely whiplash exterior to expose how underneath he was cowardly and insecure and had his own history of trauma. But if he's easy to cast as the villain, then my mother, even all these years after the last time we spoke, remains easy to valorize. It's spring 2013. I've started what's ultimately going to be a catastrophic volunteer gig in an anarchist bookstore, declaring to everyone who listens that it's practice for when I'm well enough to go back to work full-time. And a friend who also struggles with agoraphobia tells me she envies me. Quickly, I learn the artist circling the bookstore as though I'm inspecting the books, to hide that I'm moving towards the bathroom so no one sees me curl up and have a panic attack. This is progress, learning ways to hide before I'm visibly crazy. This is definitely almost over. My mother was a storyteller too. We didn't have cable as a child, so instead the images I grew up with were my mother's own personal mythology, told in funny, poignant, and entrancing tales. Every night I sat on the edge of her bed, waiting to hear the scary prom night story once more. And like any good storyteller, her life was and probably is still her own mythology, hers to manipulate and maneuver and show in any light she likes. My mother was proud to show herself as a survivor, the rugged individual who'd escaped an abusive family and then an abusive marriage through nothing but sheer pig-headed determination. A woman who got teeth drilled without Novocaine because painkillers were expensive. A woman who created communities but always gave more than she took, even when she had nothing. The story of me confronting my father 15 years ago involves him murmuring, you look at me just the way your mother did. kind of intimidating. And that was the moment where I felt the most safe, because who would have triumphed over him more completely than my mother? But my father was a storyteller too. Isn't every liar? And I was completely unprepared when he followed that up with weeks of stalking and terror. It's spring 2014. I've made it a year doing 1 day a week at the bookstore while still doing most of the housework for my depressed commercial partner, and starting a new relationship on top of all that. I'm already so active that all that's missing is a salary, right? The end of this long job is definitely near. What I know now that I didn't know then was that to make my mother invincible, the way all her own stories do, one has to write off all her scars as minor. It can't be part of the story that she came home in awful pain from skipped medication, and it was merely suffering, root necessity rather than nobility. It has to be that when we ate nothing but oatmeal for a month, because that was all that was in the pantry, that was her courage and strength rather than a stubborn refusal to be in anyone's debt. Or that after the marriage, it took 5 years and as many therapists to convince her that mental health professionals were better qualified to say whether or not she had inherited her mother's schizophrenia than her gaslighting ex-husband had been. I don't know how things are where you're from, but where I come from, it's common for people to ennoble their lives, try to give meaning to existences that don't provide it on their own terms. I saw it in everyone I ever worked with on an assembly line or in the back of a truck. I saw it in the day drums and the dimly lit bars I ate breakfast in when I worked the night shift. Even if you got nothing else to live for, you can still tell stories. It's spring 2015. I'm ready to find work. I'm going to move out and rent an apartment with my other partner. The paperwork that says permanently disabled is so I'm almost recovered now. I see now how my mother took a sort of self-destructive comfort in the false story my father told her about her mental health. Because of all the horror she'd endured during their marriage was the result of schizophrenia, she could believe the story was one where she was still in control in some way. Schizophrenia was a horror story she couldn't let go of long after the man who poisoned her with it had been carved out of her life like a cancer. Because in any other story, she might have been a victim, might have been helpless, might have even not been invincible. What I'm learning is that just telling a new story isn't enough. That there was nothing noble about my mother's refusal to accept help, nothing admirable about starvation and pain, and that no one's actually invincible. What I'm learning is that a story can kill you as easy as it can save you, and that sometimes a story does both at once. Telling a new story can remake the world, but it can just as easily paper over the cracks in the one you're trapped in. I am still not well. Right at this moment, 3 different freelance jobs are waiting for callbacks from me, which are, respectively, 3 days, 3 weeks, and 3 months overdue. And every morning I gobble a clonopin and spend an hour staring at the phone, sometimes even dialing 2 or 3 digits before I give up and cuss at myself and get started on the day's housework. I still can't fully support myself financially, and the stories I tell about how I'm going to be able to leave the house on a regular basis and make phone calls and not go catatonic in public are cheap wallpaper on a crumbling wall. These stories aren't even really my own stories. They're just dutiful repetitions of the stories that capitalism casually scrawls across every poor and disabled body, about how hunger and pain are better than relying on community once in a while. The truth is, I need other people, and I probably always will. I don't know yet what a better story is, but I know it'll have to be a true one. One where not everyone can contribute as much as they receive at all times. Which, by the way, is a story I tell just fine when I tell it about the many queer and trans strays who've drifted onto my couch or spare bed over the last 15 years, but which I can never accept as my main story. I need to tell a story where my value is solely defined by how well I convert my time into money, where unpaid labor is still labor and still deserves compensation, where the worth of accomplishments isn't tied directly to the amount of money made. I need to tell a story where everyone deserves to live, even me. It's summer 2015, and I'm about to move into the lover's family in New Jersey. She acts like it's a kindness she's doing me, but I'm going to do everything I can to make myself useful to her. I'm going to clean every day, take care of her wonderful a draining 4-year-old, help her repaint the house and fix the canoe. But, even when I can't, I'm going to try to let myself believe that I still deserve a safe and stable home. Because everybody does.